Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and welcome to another video where today we are covering the various Legion Terminators of the Horus Heresy. This is going to be based on how cool they are, their looks, their rules, sort of the whole 9 yards. The main reason I'm doing this is A, I like Terminators, and B, I can steal all of these units for my Alpha Legion, so I wanted to get familiar with all of them. So we're going to go through all, give the quick rundown on the rules. Of course, they're not going to be full rules reviews. I bet they'll get their own videos eventually. But I will, give my thoughts on them, sort of first impressions. So first up, we have the Varagyr Wolfguard Terminator Squad of the Space Wolves. Looks-wise, it's about what I'd expect. They're sort of blockier cataphracti, covered in pelts and stuff like that. Not wearing their helmets, which is very Space Wolves, but also not a big fan of that. Rules-wise, these guys aren't super unique. They have a unique version of Chosen Warriors. That means should they win a challenge, you do get +1 wound for your determining who won the combat, which is handy enough, I suppose. Sort of makes up for not having a Vexilla in the unit. In terms of weapons, despite being depicted here with chain axes, they actually come standard with frost weapons, which would be Frost Axe, Frost Sword, Frost Claw, which are all just the standard standard sort of power weapon profiles, but with a specialist weapon, and I believe it's breaching 5+, and then the irregular standard rules that they come with, which is certainly interesting. Aside from that, they're fairly standard. They get weapon skill 5+, ballistic skill, or weapon skill 5, ballistic skill 4. They've got better leadership than usual. But aside from that, really nothing too interesting. They do, of course, have all those frost weapon options, which are cool. Nothing super stand out to me. Personally, not the biggest fan of the aesthetic, not the biggest fan of the rules. I'll be giving these guys a very solid, sort of like middling B tier, I think. Because I don't hate them. I don't think they're pointless. They're just sort of plain. They're an average. So that's why they get B, because they're average. Not slightly below, but they're average. Next up, we have the Crimson Paladins, which look-wise, I do love the Crimson Paladins. I think they fit the very artistic, ornate design of the Blood Angels very well. Sword and Board is a cool look always. They're an interesting unit, as they come in 3 by standard. Can't upgrade to 10, but they come as 3 standard. And they have a special rule where when they're outnumbered, they get a feel no pain. The bigger they are outnumbered, the more feel no pain they get, which is very thematic, I'd say. Though they definitely are, I think, held back a little bit by the fact they don't have something like 3 wounds, which would be very nice, though also would make them ridiculous. They do get sort of enhanced. They come standard with power weapons, can swap them out for Sunset Blades, which are effectively just slightly enhanced power swords. The Sergeant, Exemplar, I believe he's called, gets can take a Perdition weapon, which they're all very, very nice weapons. Two-handed, increased, strength, better special rules, breaching, stuff like that. That just makes them very nice. Though, of course, two-handed does come with its benefits and downsides, though, as Terminators, they usually won't have 2 melee weapons anyway, so it's really not the end of the world. And they do get access to the Iliastus Assault Cannon, which looks awesome, because Terminators with miniguns are awesome. And honestly, I don't even mind. I tend to prefer my Assault Terminators be in Tartarus, so they can make sweeping advances. But since these guys are so focused on being tough, getting stuck into a horde and being really hard to kill, I generally don't mind that they aren't cataphracti, because the 4+ invulnerable save could really come in clutch there. And their shields give them -1 to wound. You can make a very tough unit here. Aside from that, they're fairly standard. Increased leadership, better weapon skill. But that's about it. I do quite like these guys. I think they're very interesting. I will be giving them an A tier, just because they're not my favorite. They're not the most unique. But I love the aesthetic, and their rules are fun enough that I think they definitely have a place. And I could see myself getting some of them and painting them up in the Hydra's colors. Next up, we have the Ebon Keshig of the White Scars, who are a very unique Terminator unit. They come in the pretty standard 5 to 10 format. They're wearing Tartarus armor, as to be expected. I love the, I'm not sure the word for this section, but these, I don't know, thigh guards, I believe is what they come to mind as, are very cool. Love that look. But these guys are interesting in that they don't have a sergeant. There's a few units like that on this. They don't have a sergeant. They're all leadership 10, which is very nice. Makes them really hard to pin or even break in leadership in general. That's better than... I think that's even better. That's better than Custodes leadership, to put it in a frame of reference. But they're only weapon skill and ballistic skill 4. And they have no benefit. They have no special rule, i.e. the Lernaeans, to improve that. So they're pretty much just relying on their bulk and very good weapons. The power glaives are very solid. Strength +1, AP 3, breaching 5+, and two-handed. Which is very solid, of course. No doubt about that. Or is it rending? It might be rending or breaching. I can't remember exactly which it is. They both function very similarly. They mainly differ in how they handle vehicles. It might be rending. I might be getting that mixed up. Sorry. I do like these guys. They're very cheap for Elite Terminators. They're 200 points for 5, which, again, very cheap for Elite Terminators, especially ones that may as well be impossible to pin because they're just so tough. They have the standard sort of stubborn, I believe is the rule they have. So even if you are testing them for pinning, it's very hard for them to even be affected by debuffs, which makes them very hard to slow down as well. I quite like their armor. I think it's minimalist, but in the right way, to the point where it becomes very classy almost. Even though these guys, interestingly enough, usually Terminators are reserved for like veterans, respected members of the chapter, but the Ebon Keshig are actually serving like redemption purposes or taking it as a path to glory, because not only are they showing their martial prowess, they act as a shield for the softer armored brethren of the White Scars. Overall, Ebon Keshig, really, really cool, and I could definitely see myself having some of these guys as a big unit. We'll say another special rule they have is Karkara? Something along those lines. I'm definitely mispronouncing that. But basically, it's the same as Solemn Duty or Bitter Duty, where they can't be led by anyone, which does suck unless they have the same special rule. Which means these guys really are just a block of a unit that is meant to run forward and earn glory, which I'll say they're pretty good at doing, despite their lack of weapon skill increase, which would definitely make them insanely good, but also more expensive. As they go, as a cheap elite Terminator unit, I think they're great. I love the look. The weapons are unique. Something about these guys really just speaks to me. I'll be giving them an S tier. That is mainly on their looks. I'm not entirely sure how effective they'd be. Granted, you could run a lot of them just because of how cheap they are and how relatively dangerous they are. Anyways, next we have the Iron Warriors Tyrant Siege Terminators, who a friend of mine who plays nothing but Iron Warriors raves about these guys all the time. Obviously, these Terminators have a bit more of a ranged slant. They're wearing Cataphracti armor, they have firing protocols too, and of course are wearing big old Cyclone missile launchers. They're technically Tyrant rocket launchers, which are the same, effectively, but they get 2 attacks, usually. Like Heavy 2, Assault 4 for their crack mode, or for their frag mode. But I mean, obviously, ranked up missile launchers will put the hurt on just about anything. I mean, they're no shabs in melee. Obviously, they're just not built to be exceptional in melee in any way. Just because of, well, I think you can tell why they're meant to be a ranged siege unit, fitting for the Iron Warriors, of course. Very tough, as they're wearing Cataphracti armor, though that is held back definitely by the fact that they just cost so many points. I believe this is the most expensive unit we're looking at today. They're 300 points for 5, which is just obscenely expensive. Also, our first heavy support Terminators. These guys aren't elites, and they also have no increased weapon skill or ballistic skill, so they'll only be hitting on 3s. But they do hit kite hard, as I mentioned. And the Sergeant comes with a special piece of war gear that lets them basically ignore night fighting, which is certainly nice. They're very hard to avoid getting shot by. And a big squad of 10 of them may cost you, 600 points, thereabout. But they will blow up just about anything you point them at, so that's a benefit. Looks-wise, pretty solid. It's cool, sort of bulked-up Cataphracti armor. I like the helmets. They're kind of skull-like, almost, or they're very unique, obviously, as are most of these. Looks-wise, I think it's totally solid. Fits the Iron Warriors aesthetic perfectly. And yeah, I think they're pretty solid. I'll be giving them an A tier just because, well, they just don't speak to me on a personal level, but I do still like them. Like, I like the Ebon Keshig because they just feel like... There's just something about them. They just feel so cool. And the fact that they're just so cheap to run a giant unit of them. They're not my absolute favorite, but they're certainly high up there. Next up, we have the Sekhmet Cabal Terminators. These guys are very interesting. They're effectively just standard Terminator elites, I'll say. They come with their unique force weapons, which are just worse force weapons as they don't get the doubled strength. They instead get +2 strength, but they also don't suffer. They don't suffer perils in the warp should they fail. They just don't get the benefits. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. You could give them all mauls, which would bring them up to strength 8 if they used that, which is, that's anti-tank range, which is certainly very interesting. Don't have any unique special rules. They wear cataphracti, obviously. I will say an interesting thing about them is despite wearing cataphracti, they're potentially the fastest Terminators in the game. Being able to have the Thousand Suns discipline of Pranapois, something like that. It starts with a P. Basically gives them +3 move, which makes them movement 9, which is fast even by Marine standards. Aside from that, fairly standard. A little pricey, in my opinion, for what they do. They do have the increase to weapon skill, which is nice. Their base weapon, though, I think is fine. It's just a, force weapon that isn't as good, but it's free, obviously. You could swap them in the standard, Power Fist, Chain Fist, Lightning Claws. And they are an upgrade kit, which definitely limits their sort of full unique look as they're grafted onto plastic bodies. But I still think they look quite cool. I like these sort of smooth face masks and the scarabs on their chest plates is very cool. And I like their force weapons. I think they're unique. I think they're very cool. And of course, the aesthetic of the Heresy Thousand Suns is just cool in general. I'll be giving these guys another A tier. Now, I did a whole video on the Lernaeans yesterday. They are some of the tougher, I can't think of the word, Terminators in the game. Obviously, wearing cataphracti, so 2+, 4+. They have an innate It Will Not Die, which is, of course, at the end of your turn, you get to roll any dice for any damaged models, and they get their wounds back. And they also are the only innately line Terminators here, which means they're scoring, which is just really unique for a Terminator unit. And looks-wise, obviously, they're awesome. Comes standard with power axes and Volkite chargers, which is nice because chargers are better than combi bolters. It means that they like to be up close. They also get the unique option of a conversion beamer, which is... weapon-wise is not really good for what they want to do, but it has the blind rule, which means that's just immensely useful, as they do not get a bonus to weapon skill. They do get to select a version of Legionis Astartes, excluding Alpha Legion, and they get +1 to hit against them, but of course, just being weapon skill 5 would be better in most cases. That does also apply at range, which means they're hitting on 2s at range, which is very nice. Will say, like these guys... Looks-wise, I think they're good. Rules-wise, I also think they're good. And they're Alpha Legion innately, so I like them. Next up, we have the Knights Cenobium. Obviously, here's the Lernaeans. If you want more on them, go check my video, because I'm not going to go over everything they do in detail again. Next, we have the Knights Cenobium of the Dark Angels. Looks-wise, I think pretty solid. I like the bucket helms and hoods. It's a very cool look. Very greebled. They have lots of keys. They're covered in awards, the hexagrammatrons. Rules-wise, some of the deadliest Terminators in the game. They're all weapon skill 5, except the Sergeant, who gets to the rare weapon skill 6, which means if he misses on a 1, you actually get to roll it again, and he'll hit on a 6, which won't happen often, but it's funny when it does. They're all equipped with these Tyrannic Greatswords, which are very solid, big two-handed weapons. Two-handed power swords, basically, with the standard rules, but with +2 strength, of course. They can also swap those out for Thunderhammers, which is definitely an interesting option, just to give them some anti-tank punch. Not that I even think they need it in a lot of cases, because of their rule, the Order Exemplars. The main reason, though, that I think those swords are so good is they have Murderous Strikes, 5+, which means they instant death, and it's at initiative. And they have a lot of attacks, the standard 2 + 1 on the charge, so up to 3. But they have a special rule called Order Exemplars, which allows them to pick between a few different buffs. That gets them +1 strength if an armor facing is 11 or more, which is definitely nice, just to make them more consistent against armor. They have +1 leadership, but only when when it's charged, which is... They also have reroll hits of 1 when engaged with anyone with a weapon skill of 5 or higher or in a challenge. Though they do lack chosen warriors, which is of note. And then they also get to reroll 1s against models with a toughness of 5 or any failed wound if the toughness is 6 or higher. And then also they get +1 attack if they're in multiple base-to-base contact, which is just reaping strikes. And then they also get, if you're fighting Thousand Suns, you can really make them suffer by giving the unit entire rerolls to hit and wound when they're fighting, of course. If they're fighting demons or psychers. They also get Plasma Casters, which are wrist-mounted plasma flamethrowers. Nothing insane, though they do, of course, standard plasma stuff have, they get hot, things like that. But they're only strength 4, AP 4, but, breaching, stuff like that. Which is mainly just a cool aesthetic because they're plasma flamers mounted on your wrist, which is just inherently cool. A shame they're in cataphractii armor, though. I know a lot of people like it, and I get it, but these guys want to be in melee as much as possible, and not being able to sweeping advance means they'll often, it's just unfortunate. They can't run, and they can't sweeping advance, which means it can be a little difficult to get them to combat without investing in something like a Land Raider. Though I will say, definitely one of the units I think about stealing very frequently with my Alpha Legion, because not only are they cool, they hit really hard. Next, we have the Contakars. We need to rank the Knight Cenobium. These guys, I'm going to be giving them the top of A tier. I love it, the whole thing around. I just don't love it the most. Not the biggest fan of the Heresy Angels aesthetic, and that's the main thing. Anyways, next up we're on to the Katar Terminators of the Night Lords. Now, the Katar are a pretty unique elite Terminator unit. Wearing Tartarus armor, they all come standard with either Heavy Flamers or Volkite Cardators or something like that. It's something along those lines, which is just effectively a Volkite Culverin, which is bizarre that the entire squad gets them for free, which is a Volkite Cavator. Had to look that up on the other screen. The Volkite Cavator, though, is just a 10-inch range Volkite Culverin. Obviously, these guys want to be in melee, they're Night Lords. But that's still really good, because it's just a slightly worse Volkite Culverin, which is a great weapon in general. They also can have up to 15 models, which is cool, because giant units of Terminators are cool. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. Main reason that's interesting is if you're running them as Night Lords, which I wouldn't be, so this is irrelevant, but I still wanted to mention it. They're bulky too, so they count as 2 models for outnumbering. If you have an entire unit of 15, you're looking at a unit that counts as 30 models, and there's nothing in the game that will outnumber that. So you'll always have your benefits of +1 to wound, effectively. So you don't really need them to have a pinning weapon with them, which is very nice. And saves you some points, though, of course, you'd be running an insanely expensive unit. But it's cool, isn't it? They also have this interesting special rule where they can be taken as a compulsory HQ choice, which is just cool. They all have chosen warriors, very nice. Weapon skill 5+, or weapon skill 5. I'm so used to saying 5+, or like 3+. It's just weapon skill 5, so they hit on 2s. They hit on 3s. Weapon skill is... I'm getting off track. Anyways. Not any war gear options, aside from the stuff they have the choices of at creation, either Flamers or Volkites. Though the Sergeant can take a a unique power claw, which is like a really... it's effectively a power fist, but with shred, which is pretty cool. And interestingly, murderous strikes, which he'll have instant death against most things anyways, but hey, still something to keep in mind. I quite like these guys. The look is very cool. I love these models. Not only do I love Tartarus armor, I just love this. They don't have it modeled here, but the guy with the power claw I mentioned is doing pondering a skull, which is just really cool. Definitely a unit I would consider stealing, and I will be giving these guys an S tier, just behind the Ebon Keshig, because I kind of like these models more. I'm not sure why. There's something subtly refined about the Ebon Keshig that just makes them really awesome. Next up, we have the Gorgons of the Iron Hands. So first off, they're in Indominus armor, which I love looks-wise, though unfortunately has some downsides in Heresy in that it doesn't have the mobility of Tartarus or the protection of Cataphractii. Granted, none of the reduction in mobility that Cataphractii has. They do move 6, but they can still run, they can still make sweeping advances, which is certainly nice. They do have a bit more of a restricted loadout than most, which I thought was a little strange. The Sergeant is locked to the Thunderhammer. He's called a Hammer Bearer, so I guess it makes sense, but and not that a Thunderhammer is a bad weapon, but it's just interesting to me. And then the rest are fairly standard. They get to take either Power Fist, Chain Fists, and so on. Though they don't have access to the full suite of power weapons, it's not the most uncommon thing in the world. Fairly standard. They lack any boosted weapon skill or ballistic skills. They're only 200 points. Oh, I forgot to mention, Contakars, 225 for 5, so not super expensive. Expensive, but not obscene. They come with a Feel No Pain, which is nice, but their main thing is their special Terminator armor. It's not just Indominus armor, it's Gorgon Terminator armor, which is modified Indominus. But basically, if any of these models pass an invulnerable save, every enemy model within 6 inches on a 4+, takes you roll a 4+, and everyone within 6 inches, that's an enemy, takes a blind test, which is a cool rule in concept, but I think in use would be very hard to pull off. So first off, your Terminators. So you generally are going to want to be, not taking your invulnerable save unless you have to, which means you being faced with AP2 weapons, which, while not the rarest, power axes are fairly common, isn't what you always want to be doing. So you have to get really close to them, which you want to be in melee, but you have to get them there first, and then you have to be faced with an AP2 weapon. I guess you could throw your invulnerable save, but then you have a 5+ save on your Terminators. And then, after that, if you succeed, then you have to roll your 4+, so a coin flip effectively, to potentially blind people within 6 inches. Blind is, of course, very powerful. Reducing enemies to weapon skill and ballistic skill 1 is really nasty. But it seems like cooler in concept than it is in execution. While I haven't used these guys very frequently, I just feel like they just aren't very good. Not horrible, but for 200 points, I feel they lack purpose. I think maybe if they had increased ballistic skill or weapon skill, they'd be more justifiable. But they're not super tough. They're fine killy-wise. They lack anything to make them punch up against other elite Terminators. And also, their special rule, while fun, very swingy. Which, isn't a bad thing. I'm not saying I hate the unit or anything. I just think that it's not the greatest. I will say, I do quite like the aesthetic. Plated Indominus is cool. So I'm not going to hate them, I'm not going to give them a 1 or anything, or a D. I'll be giving them a B. I think they're just niche and nothing too special. On the opposite end, we have perhaps the single most elite unit of Terminators in Heresy, the Justaerins. So these guys don't have a sergeant. They're just all Justaerins. They're all of equal rank, one could say. And are in Cataphractii armor, which is, standard 2+, 4+, 6 inch move. I will say, knocking the kit, because they don't come with any weapon options, which is very weird to me. But they have the standard, relentless, bulky. They have furious charge, so they'll get an extra attack. But as I mentioned, no sergeant, so they're all innately 3 attacks, which is great. They have leadership 9 across the board, which is also great. They come in a unit of 5, but can be upgraded all the way up to 12, which is also great. And they can take any power weapon that you would like for free. Just switch out their axes. Not that their axes are bad, because they're power axes with... Well, they're not power axes. They're closer to power swords. But they have breaching 5+, which is just great. Because having AP2 that frequently is good. Without having to sacrifice your initiative. Now, you could upgrade them to power fists, power weapons, which I think have a place. I think having some power fists or chain fists in the unit is definitely worth it. Because, well, they hit real hard, but I'd also bring their special weapons, which would be, autocannon. They can interestingly take multi-meltas, which gives them a lot of ranged punch, though those are very expensive, I will admit. They have stubborn, so really hard to slow down, aside from their very good leadership. The Justaerin, I just think, are a fantastic unit. 275 points is a lot, but I don't think they're slouching in any regard. Not having to worry about Sergeant getting picked out, which would make you easier to get pinned, is great. Having such powerful weapons and furious charge is great, because Terminators generally can't get 2 weapons for a bonus attack. Of course, a lot of their weapons are specialist, but you could, of course, give them all power lances if you wanted to. You could give them any power weapon if you wanted to. That's just my favorite, because I like reach. So having furious charge is fantastic. They're all chosen warriors, so they can issue and accept demands. They're just a really scary unit to face down. Pretty expensive. 275 points is no small amount. And of course, they don't have the 3 wounds that the Lernaean Sergeant has, I believe he's the only Sergeant that has that, which I just find strange. I think this unit is just fantastic. Justaerins are a unit I think about stealing all the time. Looks-wise, I think pretty standard. There's nothing super ornate about them. And interestingly, they're almost wearing like Tartarus helmets inside Cataphracti. Though it does look slightly like they're wearing party hats. Not necessarily the end of the world, in my opinion. I think the Justaerin, fantastic. Definitely an S tier. Just because I like the way they look and I like the way the rules work. Next up, we have one that is a unit that survives into 40k. We have the Shroud Terminators of the Death Guard. So these guys are in Tartarus armor, so looks-wise, awesome. Love their helmets, love the sides. Love their metal loincloths. Of course, power sides are, first off, awesome. And I'd say pretty solid power weapons, because they're, strength +2, AP3, sweeping strikes, and breaching 6, or rending 6, actually, I think they have, which is just a really good profile in general. But, of course, they also have their fancy wrist weapons. They're Alchem sprayers, pistols, I think they're called, which is strange because they're not. They're wrist-mounted. But they're template weapons with Flesh Bane, though they can't explode and hurt your Terminators, so be careful with that. All these guys are chosen warriors. They have the standard sort of Terminator line of rules, relentless, stubborn. They do have Battle-Hardened 1, which is a really unique rule that basically treats them as toughness 5 for the matter of instant death. So things like Power Fists won't instant death them, and you have to be at least strength 10 to do that. Of course, things like Leviathans will still rip them apart, but that aside, being able to ignore instant death on strength 8 and strength 9 weapons is really, really good. Makes las cannons a lot less effective against these guys. These guys are as tough as they should be. They're Death Shroud. They interestingly come in at 2 Death Shroud per unit, but can be upgraded up to 10 with points. The most expensive Terminators we're looking at today, I will say. It's 70 points a model, and they don't have a Sergeant. They're just all... interestingly, they're all 3 wounds with 3 attacks and leadership 9, with weapon skill and ballistic skill 5+, which is exceptional. Some of the most elite Terminators we're looking at today. I think these guys are fantastic. I love the look. They're super unique. And funnily enough, last edition of 40k, it was cheaper to buy this squad of 5 than buy 2 boxes of 3 Death Shroud from the plastic range. Perhaps the only time a resin kit has been more cost-effective than plastic. Of course, if you're playing Death Guard, these guys are almost impossible to slow down because they just can run through anything. But in terms of war gear, they have really nothing. They can take a grenade harness, which they should, and they can take melta bombs, which they also should, which definitely adds to the cost. You're going to be really paying 75 points per model, because power sides are very good, but they're going to really struggle with big, heavy stuff because they're only strength 6. So having melta bombs to just clamp. Ooh, my God, what just happened? I just smacked my. I just was waving my hand. I like to be physical when I talk, and I just smacked my credit cards all over my room. We'll clean it up later. So being able to slap melta bombs onto things like dreadnoughts, land raiders is very helpful, and they will appreciate that, being able to take on pretty much anything. Whole way around, I think these guys are excellent. Fantastic unit. I will be giving them another S tier. A unit I also consider stealing very frequently. Next up, we have the Palatine or Phoenix Terminators. Looks-wise, I'm fine. I'm fine with these guys. They're wearing Tartarus, though obviously dolled up to be Emperor's Children like. They have the standard winged claw of the Emperor, as they were the only ones allowed to use that logo, if you will. I think these guys, though, design-wise, totally fine. They come with the two-handed spears, which is definitely interesting. It's sort of like a souped-up power lance, being strength +2 instead of strength +1 while still having reach. Still has breaching. It gains breaching 6 and murderous strike. Really nasty, though they are two-handed. Again, for Terminators, not really the end of the world. Their main thing, though, they're very cheap at 200 points, so pretty tough. But they have a trio of rules that they get to pick one. Which would be +1 weapon skill, but -1 attacks, or basically making your enemy weapon skill worse, but also getting rid of your. Sorry, I'm getting all mixed up. It's either +1 weapon skill for your enemy to hit you, basically, but you. Reduce your attacks by 1, and then the other is you increase your weapon skill by 1, but also you reduce your attacks by 1, or you get +1 attacks but lower your weapon skill by 1. That was a lot of words to say. You either make it harder to hit you, or you make it easier to hit them to get less attacks, or you get more attacks but you hit less accuracy. That was very long-winded, I'm sorry. But they can take nothing really that special. I know they have the surgical augment thing, which allows them to have some extra things that I just don't know too much about. Of course, one thing to note is, as they are Emperor's Children, if you run them there, with their spears, they'll be all the way up at Initiative 6, which is just crazy. That's getting to like Primarch level initiative. Which means these guys are very competent at getting into combat and killing something before it gets to strike. They will struggle with real tough enemies, as they're only strength of 6, of course, when they're fighting. But if you bring along, they're not going to be ripping land raiders apart, basically, is what I'm saying. I think these guys are very solid. I love anything with reach. Design-wise, though, I'm sort of lukewarm on them. I think they're cool, just not super unique. I'll be giving them an A tier, though. Probably the bottom, though. They're not the most, interesting. Next, we have one of my, I don't want to say least favorite, but one of the weirder ones. Here we have the Grave Wardens of the Death Guard, another heavy support entrant on our list. So these guys have an interesting bundle of special rules. They don't have any boosted stats. They're just standard Terminators and Cataphracti. They have Shrouded, which is a feel no pain kind of save. And They come with poisoned grenade launchers, which is cool aesthetic-wise. Of course, they also have their poison spewers that are on their chest. And I'm sorry, this is a very childish thing, but every time I look at these guys, I'm just like, they have breasts. They look like it. They do. Don't they? Am I wrong? Look at them. Look at them. That shoot poison gas, which are a bunch of template weapons. They're your basic poison weapons. Aside from that, they've got power fists. These guys really just don't interest me very much. I find them to be very kind of pointless. Obviously, Fleshbane has its place, but I don't think Terminators generally struggle to shoot at infantry with things like autocannons, plasma blasters, or just destroying them in melee as they usually do. And Shrouded 6+ is nice, but I could also get a better feel no pain with a Primus Medicae, which is not totally fair because these guys aren't that pricey, if I'm not mistaken. But their weapons are slightly kind of just mediocre against everything. They lack AP, which is definitely a shame. Well, I say they lack it. Their grenade launchers have AP 5, so you're only reliably punching through wounds on militia, which, hey, there's some really annoying militia units, so that could be helpful. And then, of course, the grenade launcher has crack, which is AP 4, good against solar auxilia. And then their death cloud projectors are AP 4 as well. So again, not really ripping Space Marines apart. Shrouded 6+ is nice. Firing protocols 2 lets them shoot both at once. But being template weapons means that running big squads of them, it starts to become an issue. And as I mentioned they aren't that expensive. I was actually wrong. These guys are $250 for 5 and 45 points per past that. Just really not exceptional in any way, in my opinion. And they just look like they have breasts. I can't get that out of my head. Like when I look at these guys from a distance, they just look weird. They do. And I can't change that. These guys, I think they're C tier. I'm sure there's uses for them. I can't think of them. Though, to end on a more positive note, the Red Butchers. So the Red Butchers are, interestingly enough, if I'm not mistaken, wearing, technically it's a modified version of Cataphracti. Cataphracti, whatever you want to call it. I flip-flop all the time. But these guys, let me rattle off their lore real quick. These guys first appeared at Isvan 5, Loyalist and Traitor. It's when World Eaters just completely lost it, went insane. The ones that truly lost it, though, the Tech Marines trapped them inside Cataphracti Terminator armor and depowered it, and then they hang them by chains in the hulls of their ships, just sitting there screaming, completely insane. And then when they go to war, they take them off the chains, herd them into a land raider, and then just let them off the leash. So these guys are a really unique stat line. Standard Cataphracti, 6-inch move, 2+, 4+, no swooping advances or running. But they have Leadership 6, which seems awful, but they're fearless, so they auto-pass most tests. Their Weapon Skill 5, which is nice. Ballistic Skill 3, so they're really bad at shooting. Only the Sergeant can, or any of them can take guns, but why would you? They come stocked with the double power axe, which is really awesome. They're Ravening Madmen, which means everyone hits them very effectively, but also these guys hit really hard. Unsurprisingly. The main thing, though, is they can't be led by anyone except Angron or other raving madmen. But they also get... everyone hits them easier, but they're harder to wound, which is an interesting mix. Price-wise, fairly standard, 250 points, which for how deadly they are, I think is pretty solid. They do have 2 melee weapons, obviously 2 power axes is standard. Sergeant can take double chain fists or double thunder hammers, which is really cool. I think these guys are pretty interesting. They're just murder machines, plain and simple. Just a horde of dudes they're going to be attacking with a lot of weapons, obviously, just because, they're double equipped. So they're going to be at 3 attacks when they fight, up to 4 if they charged, and then +1 for the Sergeant, of course. And they have Hatred everything, which means they're always re-rolling attacks. So they'll be hitting almost all of their attacks because they're Weapon Skill 5. So they're never going to be that inaccurate, and they're re-rolling. These guys are as simple and as deadly as they come. They will rip through just about anything you send them at. Of course, though, being fearless is nice, but also means that they can be trapped by things they just can't wound. If these guys get stuck in with, like, honestly, if someone just sent a Land Raider into them, they would seriously struggle because they can't purposefully fail or weapons are useless. So they'll just be stuck there, scratching the paint, so to speak. But I don't think that's a knock against them. They're so deadly that even though they won't be ripping tanks apart, that's why I say that. If you give the Devoured to Chain Fists, yeah, they will. Where was I? Regardless. What I mean is they're super deadly. Just make sure to give the Sergeant a couple of bigger weapons so they can take out tanks. Anyways, I will be giving these guys another high A, probably just around the segments. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. This video's been all over the place. I threw my credit cards everywhere. I'll have to clean that up. Anyways, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.